And I was too afraid to tell them that I think that, I'm in the wrong course. I feel that I might do better somewhere else.
Okay.
But
hello and welcome to a very new episode of the Design Baithak. I'm your host Jagat Singh Lamba, and today we have with us a strategic brand and identity designer, Harshita Sareen. So, thank you, Harshita, for having us here today.
Thanks for having me here.
So she's basically did her bachelor's in design from NIFT Kangra, and now she's having her own consultancy. As a consultant, she's working now.
Yeah, I'm working as an independent designer. Consultant.
Right. So Harshita, thank you for coming here today, and I would like to have a conversation about a lot of things, and I've heard a lot about you from one of our faculties as well. So tell me something more about you. What have you done, and how's your education been, and about your career and.
Okay, so right now I'm in this space of branding, identity, and packaging designs. There's a little bit of understanding what the aim of a brand is before we get into the designing bit. Right. So there's a little bit of strategy involved, but it's not brand strategy per se. There's definitely a lot of identity involved, and there's also some bits of marketing involved, because those are some very crucial things when you try to think about. Design essentially is communication, right? So when you want to communicate, what's the aim of this communication, So it prevents us as people it prevents our biases from seeping in. So that's what I do. Where I started was, I graduated NIFT, as you said, but I specialized in fashion design. So that's where I started.
Okay.
I did a couple of internships. One was at Folkswear, one was at Yepni. When it was still there. And then my first job was as a fashion designer in Dhaka. After that, I took a stand and I realized that fashion design wasn't working out. I wasn't a right fit. And I came back. I invested a little more time into crafting my skill.
Okay.
And then I started looking for the right jobs as a graphic designer. And after a couple of jobs, one was spectacular, where I got the opportunity to really grow and understand how a business works. What are the things that go behind a business, how an agency is run.
Right.
And it was a lovely opportunity. So I got the opportunity to grow there from a junior designer to a designer to a senior designer to an art director. And now we're here.
So going back a little ahead, even before you entered the corporate world and in the field of design, how were you as a student and what were your major interests in life?
Okay, so I'm going to say that for the foundation year, I was quite a decent student, because at least that's what my marks said. But if you look at my report card, I was increasingly a horrible student, right? Because as I said, I started to realize that fashion design was not the right fit.
Right.
What happened was that I started off very strong and then I dipped, and then I did not, even when I graduated, I did not really make it. So I was I'm not even sure if I was a subpar, student or not. But I was one of those students who was constantly told by the faculties that, why aren't you working? We think you have potential, but why? What's your problem, And I was too afraid to tell them that I think that, I'm in the wrong course. I feel that I might do better somewhere else.
Okay.
But it's very difficult to accept that the commitment you've made for 4 years, or maybe what you then imagine is the rest of your career, is not the right decision. It's very daunting for a 19-year-old or an 18-year-old, to have this conversation with themselves, and to understand that you'll have to go back and have this conversation with your peer group, with your family, with your parents.
Right.
And I don't think that I understood, that there was a possibility that it might not be as big of a hassle that I was making it inside my head.
Right.
So
one thing you said that about the foundational course, as you mentioned. So even though this entire concept of having preliminary courses started way back, like hundreds of years back in the Bahos school maybe. So I want to know that, is it still relevant to have a foundational studies course? Because even I'm currently in a foundational course, and I can really relate to that question. So I want to ask your opinion, like, was it really helpful to have that preliminary course and, have a generic idea about everything that you're about to study further? or you think it's not a good idea anymore? Because many design schools don't even offer that opportunity anymore.
For me, and in my experience, I think it was the best thing that I was exposed to. Because the foundation year is essentially being exposed to design fundamentals.
Right.
You don't really understand then how versatile design fundamentals are. But at this stage, I can use that same information to design a space, to design a digital space, to design a print, maybe an editorial, or even something that's not, one of these. It can be experience design. You understand what is the importance of repetition, how do you understand space, So, I mean, not only this, and you also get the opportunity to interact with a myriad of people who are interested in different things.
Right.
So you get the opportunity to put all of your brains together, really jumble things up, and you come up with really colorful unicorn kind of ideas, and weird dinosaurs and all those things. That's the beauty of a foundation course. Also, because you're not entirely exposed to what is yet to come, there's not so much pressure to conform. So I feel like it's a very good time in your life to really scale, to really make friends across a lot of different specializations, and really understand, what are the things that you maybe, you might miss. So I think, so I feel like the foundation course is really relevant. It puts you in a better place to understand. It gives you the opportunity to go wide before you go deep, right? So if you never, the wider you go, the deeper you can, eventually. Because if I try 3 things, I'm going to choose what is the best of those 3. If I try 15, I'm going to select, the one that I absolutely love. So doing something that I love, that is a good fit, and that might add some value, is definitely going to take me more ahead, and it's going to cause less burnouts. It's going to make me want to strive more than something else.
Definitely open the preconceived notions that you have earlier, right? Before even entering a school.
I think that is a wild journey. That's going to go on until...
Definitely.
I mean, it's still going on for me. So I think it's like that for a lot of people. Surprisingly, sometimes you will enter the industry and you will still face bias, or some preconceived notions that will, some bits may never escape you, or I'm yet to find out when that stage comes. So I'm not there. It changes your opinion, and it makes you... Design school is an open space. That's one of the best things. After we graduated, I'm going to share a small anecdote, a small instance, which did not happen with me. It happened with a friend of mine. So she met a junior after she graduated, and she was working her first job, and we had a couple of years in the industry. And she said, you remember college? It was a different place, right? Even though we were in Kangra, I don't think I'll ever be given the opportunity to be as free or, be allowed to express myself as truthfully as I could. So I think that's one of the greatest things about being in a design school. And I'm going to say it's any design school. Most design schools, I feel. Everybody who's come from a design school, you meet somebody like, hey, you're a designer, hey, you went to design school, and there's an inherent smile, because you know that you can be a little bit more truthful, a little bit more wild, a little bit more explorative. What's the word for you can explore your ideas a little bit more. So I think that's a fun thing about design.
So Harshita, you mentioned that you're working with your friends in the foundation year, and I remember that it was such an amazing experience to work with so many people at the same time, working on various projects, and we had so many different classes where we used to all sit together and learn. So apart from the academical point of view, what were the other things that actually helped you in, how did that work, togetherness and, work culture helped you in more different aspects other than design?
In the foundation course?
Exactly, yeah.
So I'm going to say that the foundation course is essentially where you get exposure about the different places, lifestyles and cultures that people come from. It's a more qualitative learning experience than a quantitative, and by quantitative I mean where you're not earning technical skills.
Right.
You know, you're only being pushed out of the
Comfort
limiting
zone,
beliefs
maybe?
in your mind.
Yeah.
Yes, also comfort
zone,
zones,
yeah.
absolutely, because it's a different space, right?
right.
It's very different from school.
You're not used to work so long, and it's the entire culture is so different.
Yes. Oh yes, the culture is absolutely different. Not just college culture. I mean, I think that is exciting by itself. It's also a lot of different people essentially come from different places, and they have different limiting beliefs.
Right.
And we don't understand about limiting beliefs until we hear a friend say something that sounds difficult, that we don't understand where they're coming from. You know, that's where you realize, oh, I didn't. You know, so this happens, you know, and the more that happens, and when you're able to acknowledge those things, you're also able to recognize your inner voices and the patterns of, you know, so I think that's incredible.
Right.
You know, so I'm going to say that beyond professional, you know, experiences.
I think apart from all that, you tend to know people on a very personal level. So the kind of bond that you make with them is totally different from what it is in school.
Yes.
So
that's the most unfiltered, long amount of time you spend with, you know, people your age. So it's incredible. It's that's why even when you're exerting yourself, you're tiring yourself out, you're pushing yourself, it's still fun.
Right.
You know, that's great. I'm going to go ahead and say that professionally, you'll grow even more with your friends after the foundation year.
Right.
Because what happens is that you will be focusing on once, you know, your expertise will start into, your funnel will start into narrow down a little bit, as will for all of your friends. So it will be really a lot of fun to see what your friends are doing when they have different projects.
Yes.
You know, so their assignments sometimes will be far more cooler than maybe what you're doing. You know, and simply the fact that you can go out and be involved in those assignments with your friends and see what everybody else is doing, it's a gala of a time.
Right.
So, you know, that's one thing that's going to change probably now that you're not in the foundation year, but it's going to be even more fun.
Yeah, right. So, as you were coming close to your fourth year and you're applying for various jobs and you had a college placement, I believe. So, what was that entire scenario like, and what were your thoughts going on in the mind when you were applying for such things, or did you apply for any of such placements, and how was it?
So, by this time, I'd accepted for myself that, you know, fashion design was not my cup of tea. I really had. But I recognized that I enjoyed the research-based strategy, you know, the digital bit. So working with softwares, making graphic t-shirts, I realized that was fun, you know, I could work with that. So then I was trying to apply for graphic design placements.
Okay.
And incidentally, what happened was that the first day of placement, I ran a fever.
Okay.
I think I was 101 degrees and I was absolutely exhausted.
Oh.
So I was practically there supporting my friends. I don't think I wanted to apply anywhere, and I was definitely not applying for fashion design jobs. What we'd done is 3 of us had all of our resumes. What happens in the placements is that you go in with a deck of resumes. So you'd have somebody has 20 copies, somebody has 50 copies, you know.
Right.
And what you do is you go and give your resumes out, you know, or sometimes copies of your portfolio out to different classes, you know, that are for every different company or organization. So, and there was a call for a graphic design placement on the 2nd floor. And my friends had already left. And, you know, there was a contract that for every graphic design job, you go out and you give these 3 portfolios. One of mine and 2 of my friends. So, and they were busy at that point of time. So I was like, okay, this is my call. I reached out to the 2nd floor, you know, and I was rushing very dramatically trying to make it, you know, there was a person, I think there was a senior masters or something. It's like, hey, fashion design. You're like, yeah, because inherently fashion design. You say, give me your resume. And I'm like, no. I don't want to apply, you know, because I'm trying to go for the graphic design. And the moment I reached, they shut the door. So I couldn't give my resumes. I was very disheartened. Obviously, my shoulders slumped. And I was walking back. And this senior, you know, looked back at me and laughed. He was like, so now you want to give me your resumes? You've come this far. Give it, no. I was like, yeah, okay, you know, all right. I had the resume any which way. So I think that was probably the only job I actually gave my own resume to, and I got shortlisted.
Oh wow.
And there are a few rounds of interviews that went
Okay.
for 3 days, and then there was a couple of times our portfolios were shared. We had, I mean, yeah, that was a few rounds of interviews, and I got the job. It was the one job that I applied for. I made it.
That's
for,
interesting.
Yeah, and it was in Dhaka.
Oh, okay.
I had no idea what I was signing myself up for. It was just, hey, cool. It looks cool. You know, the salary was in dollars, right?
Oh.
It's very, these things kind of fascinate you when you're younger, you know? So
That seems to be like a bit of a conflict, because like studying 4 years of bachelor's of design in fashion design, and then you sort of changed your line completely, right? I mean,
yeah.
So
The good thing that happened in the interview was that I think after the group discussion, we had a one-on-one interview, and when I shared my portfolio, then I told them, you know, I know that it's not inherently a very fashion design based portfolio,
right,
because I want to work with, you know, maybe e-commerce brands and
right,
more in a space where digital is an important part of the job. And they said, perfect, that's what we're looking for.
Oh.
So then it made sense for me to, you know, invest in that interview because things seem to be aligning.
What was that one thing that made you pick for that job? I mean, since you said you didn't have any work related to digital.
I did. So I'd interned with Yepme, right?
Okay.
And before that, I'd interned with Folkswear.
Oh, right.
So both of those, Folkswear did graphic t-shirts and Yepme was basically an e-commerce brand.
Okay.
It was fairly big then, and it was Myntra and Yepme were competitors then.
Right.
So, and we're talking about, I think, 2013, 2014.
So even though you didn't have a lot of work for it, but even few internships made a way, like that. That's how it
few
was.
internships and personal projects.
Okay.
Because this Folkswear internship was actually not required.
Right.
It was just me trying to figure out that will I ever amount to anything? Will anybody ever give me an opportunity? Am I worth something? You know, because that was where I was starting to really understand and becoming really disheartened by where I was in life, in my, you know, academically. And because I hadn't, looking back, I don't think I had ever been performing so badly or horribly, you know, where I was actually putting in effort, but there wasn't result. And what the results weren't congruent to what I, you know, what the amount of effort that I was really trying to put in. That did not add up. Okay. So that left me very disheartened, and it made me realize that, you know, if you want to last, because it feels like a very competitive space, you know, you have 36 students and everybody is pursuing the same specialization. It's, if you're not making it, you're not, I mean, you feel disheartened, right? Because you see your friends and you see your classmates doing incredible work. It can really get to you.
Right.
So that was what was essentially happening. So I realized, okay, I need to lean in to what my strengths are. Maybe I need to look back, because in your specialization, you're studying between 11 to 13 subjects, or at least that was how our course was structured. And I wasn't horrible with all of them. I was just horrible with whatever was important in terms of credit. So the pattern making, I was decent at, but I wasn't very enthusiastic for. Garment construction was horrible for me. I did not have the patience to sit and complete a garment.
Right.
I don't think I still do. I hated ironing clothes. I don't know what I was doing in the fashion design, you know, course. So, but apart from those, there were especially a lot of 2 credit, 3 credit and 1 credit courses that really kept me going.
Right.
Some of those I genuinely enjoyed. Marketing was one of them.
Right.
You know, so I started to, and I realized that when we were doing our portfolio development projects, for example, the bits where the first bit, which is inherently a little bit difficult, because you have to spend a lot of think time in it. You know, what problem am I going to take? How am I going to structure the brief? What will the constraints be? How do I want to approach it? You know, what will my way of tackling this communication be?
Right.
Those were the bits that I had fun with. I did not have a problem generating ideas. I really had a problem executing them to a finish line.
Right,
And
right.
I would get stuck a lot where I to make a finished product
Right.
of an idea, but in the form of an
Right, right.
of a outfit or in a or apparel or garments, you know. That was a place that I struggled so much with it that I think that till date I would be.
But I think that's true for all students because you're just entering the, the entire
But that was a
industrial...
theme for me, right?
Okay.
You know, that was so. My second year, that was a problem. Third year, that was a problem, and the fourth year too, that was a problem.
Okay.
You know, so repetitively, that was a problem that I was having. You know, and
Right.
it was the same courses that I wasn't scoring in.
Right.
You know, and the other bits I was good at. So I had this Pauramita ma'am was her name, right? She was very encouraging. Every time I had a concept, she'd be like, "Hey, this is going in a very good
Right.
direction. You know,
Right,
put in
right.
effort and don't give up this time."
Right.
But I would stumble and fall whenever it was time for execution, you know, and not inherently because my ideas were bad or maybe I didn't understand. I just couldn't keep going because it was not the right fit for me.
Right.
It felt very exhaustive. The entire process from after where I had to start. I think after pattern making was where I would kind of give
So
up.
how did you overcome such struggles? Because I remember, like, even when I work generally, the biggest struggle I have is that I'm not able to satisfy myself with whatever I do. So that never like ceases me to stop working even more harder. So this is one of your major struggles that you said, execution part. So how
Yeah.
did you overcome that struggle and convert it into a strength maybe?
That's a very good question. And that's going to plague you for a very long time.
Yeah.
Not necessarily just college life.
Right.
This was a struggle that plagued me even after. So sometimes when I was working a graphic design job, I'd wonder if, this was the right decision.
Right.
Mostly because the ideas I had in my head weren't so good on the screen, or sometimes not as good on paper, or maybe the mock-ups, What happens is, it's a good thing that the ideas in your head are better than what you have on
Right.
paper. It's because we're exposed to a lot of very polished ideas and work done by specialists, thanks to Instagram, thanks to Pinterest, thanks to all the social media platforms that we're
Right.
on, So what we see what they've done,
Right.
and that's where we imagine our finished product to be.
Right.
But fact of the matter is that simply just because we don't have that sort of experience, we don't have that expertise, we don't have that technical know-how, a person who has 4 years of experience will be able to execute maybe a logo in a couple of hours.
Right. Right.
It's not a stretch, especially when you have the right brief in front of you. For a designer, for a young designer, a
Right.
student, right? If you're in the foundation year or maybe second year, third year, the logo that you come up with in 4 hours, it's not going to be a fun one. It's not going to be a cut that makes it your portfolio, or that you'll be proud of when you look back.
Right.
It's simply the learning curve takes time. So that's going to happen, and it's going to be a recurring theme. What happens is, so there's going to be a point where your learning curve becomes, is you're at a good place and you're like, hey,
Right.
what I imagine I can execute up to a fairly decent
Right.
extent, right? And then you'll be exposed to some more ideas, some more
Right.
different things, and
Right.
it's almost like, hey, look, Photoshop, now I'm a whiz at Photoshop, but also look at these people who are doing Illustrator,
Right.
So now you have to become a whiz at Illustrator. Maybe then it's going to be After Effects. And it's not necessarily technical skills. It's also, hey, I'm good with logos, but I think I'm, maybe not as good with packaging projects. Maybe I'm not good at scaling a project. Maybe I need some more exposure with branding. Hey, how did they do this marketing thing, Or how did they come up with these ideas? Hey, why can't I do that? So in some form or the other, there's always going to be this graph where you have a learning curve and you have a expectation of a desired result. So embrace it.
Right.
That's what leads to growth.
Right. So since you mentioned that today the internet is filled with so many people putting out their work, and students are exposed to so many designs, and they don't really at times understand what is that context of a particular designer has done something and why he did it. So they tend to feel that everything is good and everything, they try to just soak it in as it is. So what thing helped you build your personality, your identity, and be unique and separate and stand out from the crowd, and something that helped your personality and made you a unique person as in life.
So are you talking about how did you find your style? Is that the
Exactly,
question?
yeah, right.
Okay. I'm going to say something that might sound controversial about this. I don't think as a designer it's necessary for you to have a style. When you have a style, if you're an illustrator, it will help for you to have a niche.
Right.
Not necessarily a style. A style is good for you to boom on a social platform.
Right.
That's where it is. So if you have a very prominent style of illustration, for example, there's a possibility that if you're at it, you understand the analytics well and you post accordingly, you might boom up, you might get a very nice response on Instagram.
Right.
Does not mean that that's the only thing you do.
True.
It looks very fascinating, but we also need to understand that to some degree, a little bit of style is actually just the area of work that you're comfortable with, that you're good at, that you inherently fall back upon.
Right.
And it does not necessarily have to be a visual style.
Right.
So that's, especially as a graphic designer who's young, eventually you'll be out looking for a job. And if you have a very prominent style that feels visually similar,
right,
how will you work for different brands and how will you solve different problems if essentially your communication keeps on looking the same thing?
True.
As the same way?
True.
Right? So I don't think style is it, but I feel like it has a little bit more nuance. So it's more about, this comes back again to what we discussed earlier. You need to have breadth of experience. Right. So, and this is, as we talked about the growth graph, this is also going to be a recurring theme. How do you build expertise? It's not that one day you wake up and you realize that this is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life and you're a pro at it. That's not going to happen. So today you're in the foundation course, right? You'll have, how many subjects do you have?
About 5 to 6.
You have 5 to 6, right? How many of them do you really enjoy?
Well, not many, but yeah, the ones I enjoy, I truly give my best in it. So
what are those? Give me a couple of examples.
I think it's visual aesthetics and visual communication are one of the major chunks of my foundational studies. Cool. So we have like multiple minor subjects in that entire chunk of course.
Exactly. So now you have 2 subjects that you really like, right? That was from 6 subjects.
Right.
So you've started to niche down already,
right.
So from 6 to 2, and then these 2 will have say 25 more, and then you'll pick the 4 or 5 that you like, maybe a little more, maybe a little less, and then you'll go out in the industry will throw curveballs at you, different things that you will have to do, even if you don't want to, and there'll be a little there might be some things that you enjoyed there, so then you expand a little bit again and you start to find what works within that framework for you, so you keep on niching, and this becomes an ever-going process.
Right.
So that's how you kind of find your place. That's how you make a mark for yourself. If that was the core of the question.
So one thing that I've majorly learned in this first semester is something that you cannot, sort of work in isolation. You need to have that level of interaction between your peers, your faculties, and I think only then there is some sort of a communication, and only then design can be, So what are your thoughts on design not being done in isolation? Because there are people who, try to achieve closure and get inspiration from somewhere else, and they just don't like working in teams, and they don't want to work alone. So what do you think about it? And
I think, so if you're working independently, if you have a design process where you want to isolate yourself, that's okay. But you need to ensure that you still have a lot of stimuli,
right?
And knowledge, information coming at you from a lot of different sources,
right?
Especially when you're starting out, because you're going to make some assumptions there.
True.
Those assumptions might fall flat, especially if you aren't working with a lot of professionals or experts for every minor nuance that you're making a decision for. So for example, when you're learning UI UX design, right, there's a reason that you have to understand user interaction for user experience, or user experience to build a user interaction system that works, right? How do you learn user experience? How do you optimize it?
Right.
It's by spending time with it.
Yeah.
So there are multiple ways to do that. One is that you learn to collaborate. You work with your friends, you design something and you take it to 10 different people, 10 different friends, and you ask them, hey, does this look like a final app maybe, or a website? Does this look like a legit website or a web page?
Right.
And everybody's going to have some feedback, right? So you see what they're trying to say. You compare it with other relevant websites or web pages. So it's almost like you're doing your due diligence. You need due diligence to make so that communication is proper.
Right.
You must have realized that we talk about websites, apps, and digital experiences being good only when they're intuitive.
Right.
How do you make something intuitive?
Right.
If something has to be intuitive, it means that universally there's some knowledge or there's some common threads that are going on. If you're working in isolation, it's very difficult for you to understand how. And if you're new and you work in isolation, you don't consult your mentors, you don't speak to your facilitators, you won't know what are the right places to find that inspiration from.
True.
So it's an easy way to get frustrated with your work, to not be able to understand why you're not progressing, even when you're putting in a lot of effort.
So have you come across in your life where you were, sort of designing for a particular community or a particular set of people who were not close to you, and you had to, get a proper survey or a research? So how did you go about it? Because probably distance was a major factor, or the geographical location was a major factor. So
when you're working professionally, there's a lot at stake, right? But you also need to understand that you're probably at the lower rungs.
Right.
So, the organization that you're working for, or maybe the brand that you're working with, will have a lot of insight for you.
Right.
There will always be somebody who's been in those situations, who's interacting with the customers, who's interacting with the target audiences and trying to understand the behaviors. So you need to ask the right questions, and you need to speak to them enough to understand where they're coming from.
Right.
Also, that's where we do competitor analysis. If somehow you don't have access to all of this information, or if it feels like that you're in a place where you're not being given the opportunity to ask the right questions.
You might rely on to a secondary research, probably.
Absolutely.
If not primary.
So you do a lot of competitor research, and you see what's working for what brands, right? Because a lot of times what happens is the things that we think are cringy actually end up working for a lot of target, for
audiences. Yeah.
Exactly. So that's where competitor analysis will come in. Maybe that's where that's the things that you learn from college that you can apply later. Yeah.
So currently, since you're doing a lot of brand identity work, and I would like to know, how would you actually define a brand? Is it, if it's not a product, if it's not something as an identity, if it's not just a company, how would you define brand? What is brand to you?
Okay, so as you rightly said, a brand is not a product. A brand is not a logo. A brand is not a brand name. From the Brand Gap, I think Martin Humayr says, he has the best definition, that I like to refer to. A brand is a feeling,
Right.
So that's it. Your brand is how you make your customers feel.
Wow.
So what is Nike? It's an emotion. Nike tells you that if you have grit, you have determination, that's where the association comes in.
Right.
Apple said very infamously, we're for the square pegs in the round holes, or vice versa. Yeah. So Apple is telling you that, we're for the creative thinkers, we're for the people who are trying to make our own mark, we're for the people, who feel that they're being limited, we're for people who want to push boundaries. And Microsoft says that we're for everybody, we're good, we're reliable, we're your regular office going fellows, So whatever you need, we're good people and we're here, right? So essentially a brand is how it makes its customers feel.
True.
That's a brand.
True. So I would like to know what are some of the work you're doing currently, and how is it exactly different from what you started off as, and if you're allowed to share it.
Okay, so I started off as a fashion designer. I don't think we've done that enough in this conversation, I feel like let's leave that bit apart, right? So then it started with a little bit of marketing. It started with POS. POS is point of sales. Some marketing collateral. Then maybe making some digital assets. I was working with Tali.
Okay.
And they had a lot of brands. So that was most of my learning comes from there. And so when you spend enough time working behind the scenes, you start to inherently feel,
Right.
what a brand is, or what is relevant and what is not.
Yeah.
It takes you that little bit of learning curve, and then that's where you start to, once you do that, once you can reverse engineer, or once you're behind the scenes and you understand how a brand makes you feel, but how do you channel it into communication, visually, digitally, in print, and whatever format, right? That's where you start to actually understand how you can discover a brand. I'm not going to say make a brand, because you cannot make a feeling. You can discover it, right?
True.
So you can make way for a brand, and you have to leave enough wiggle room for the people to tell you, or the brand itself to tell you,
True.
What it is going to be. And how do you determine if a brand is successful or not? It's when it becomes greater than your understanding of it or my understanding of it.
Right.
Recently, with one of my clients, we were speaking about, what were the things that we can do. And I think there was some visual imagery involved, and we're talking about, getting somebody on board to click a couple of pictures, doing a shoot or something like that.
Okay.
And I said to them, while I understand where, I don't think this is on brand. He's like, yeah, that's exactly what I thought. Actually, drop that bit. I have a better anecdote. So recently I was working with one of my clients, and we were looking at packaging samples.
Okay.
He said we'd been through a few bottles in glass shapes, and he sent me a new catalog.
Okay.
He's like, hey, this has a couple of new samples, and I think I have an idea of what we can look at, but I want you to, independently have a look. I was like, okay, cool. I went through it and I shortlisted 5 samples, 5 shapes, and I shared those with him. And I got the response, and he said, hey, those are exactly the ones I selected.
Yeah.
And I said, cool, because now that means you're starting to understand, what the brand is. I'm like, yeah, that's exactly what I thought, that's the brand. So at that stage, we recognize that it was not about my preferences. It was not about his, even though, and this is his baby, right?
Yeah.
So, but the brand had started to come into its own identity, So that's where you know that you're doing the right job, or you're on the right track. You're on the right track.
It's very intuitive in nature, right? It's not just something you can force it out on the audience.
Yes. Right? Yes. I think when you force something on the audience is when you can get a lot of backlash.
Right.
If you rigid, it's like building a bridge. If you build it with material that is too rigid and has no leeway, it's going to fall apart.
Definitely.
And if you make it too flimsy, then it's going to wobble far too much for anybody's comfort, right? So you have to find a balance.
Right. So Harshita, do you have some final words for the young aspiring students?
Yes, I think I want to address 2 things. The first one is, as you asked me behind the scenes a couple of times, if like me, you're worried that you're not in the right course, or maybe you're not enjoying what you're doing, make conscious decisions, start to eliminate the things that you don't like, and go and focus in a deep way on the things that you do, so that eventually you'll be able to find things that work out, and keep at it. Something's you're going to find a way. Just keep at it, right?
Yeah.
And the second is, you're not only as good as your last project. So
true.
Don't beat yourself over what you've done. It's not, you're more than that.
Right.
You'll grow a lot, and you're multifaceted. It's more than,
Right.
Yeah.
That's some really good thoughts. So thank you so much for having a conversation with us today. And I'll be dropping a link of Harshita's work in the chat box.